In 1947, Winston Churchill told the House of Commons, "It has been said that democracy is the worst form of government, except all those other forms that have been tried from time to time." But for those of us who were born into and grew up in a modern democracy with a long history of success, like the US, we can find ourselves taking our form of government for granted. To us, it's always been this way, and it doesn't seem likely that it will change very much. Of course, we've all been trained in the practice of democracy, at least in its simplest and most direct forms.
Now as never before, American education is challenged to help prepare the new generation for the vital business of acting as free individuals in a free society.
Nor is this focus on democracy and its crucial connection to education anything new for America. Thomas Jefferson, whose influence in the design of both the Land Ordinance of 1784 and the Northwest Ordinance of 1787 is clear, summed up his thoughts in an 1816 letter to Charles Yancey. If a nation expects to be ignorant and free in a state of civilization, it expects what never was and never will be. As early as the Northwest Ordinance, those shaping the new nation and its representative government stated that religion, morality, and knowledge being necessary to good government and the happiness of mankind, schools and the means of education shall forever be encouraged. As Article 8 of the Indiana Constitution shows today, knowledge and learning generally diffuse throughout a community, being essential to the preservation of a free government. It shall be the duty of the General Assembly to encourage, by all suitable means, moral, intellectual, scientific, and agricultural improvement, and to provide by law for a general and uniform system of common schools, wherein tuition shall be without charge and equally open to all. Today, every state's constitution requires it to provide a school system where all children in the state can receive an education. The requirement for state-supported systems of public schooling and of accredited private schools that share the duty of enlightening the citizenry demonstrates that our elected leaders have, from the beginning of the Union, had no doubts about the importance of an educated public to the continuing function of our democracy. We carry this over into our adult lives with elections in our civic organizations and service clubs. Whenever Americans run into a problem that needs broad support for its solution, the first tool we reach for is a democratic one, an election. This point had special relevance in 2022 in Indiana, since one of the state's major parties purged the word democracy from its website. Over our more than 2 centuries as a nation, there have been hiccups along the way for our larger representative democracy.
Let's start with this. Gore won the popular vote. Only the antiquated Electoral College allowed the man who came in second to become president. Most countries, if you get the most votes, you win.
There have even been some pretty major upsets for the nation, such as Watergate.
Well, I'm not a crook. I've earned everything I've got.
Or the violent reaction on the part of those opposed to the post-Civil War amendments to the Constitution, or that bloody war itself. Yet, despite sometimes great anguish, we have weathered these storms and come out the other side stronger for the struggle. But how healthy and secure is our larger democracy today? The one for which we elect our local, state, and national leaders. We face global crises ranging from climate change to vast and destabilizing inequality to the resurgence of autocratic regimes across the globe, even amongst our democratic allies. Today, we hear a lot about how polarized the American public has become. We live and work with less and less contact with those who don't share most of our opinions. We all seem to have hurried to the safety of our political fortresses and have pulled up the drawbridge behind us. Debates and bitter arguments that once took place largely behind the scenes among our elected officials have found their way to our Facebook feeds and so to our dinner tables and family get-togethers. Pundits score points against one another in the media, and everyone seems dug in and unwilling to listen.
I think the biggest way our democracy is being attacked is through either state actors or just through bad people, bad faith, misinformation.
I see that our democracy is under attack when we continue to see lower and lower numbers with voter turnout.
I think democracy is being attacked by the lies from within and then exterior lies. And I think
into examining the health of our democracy, we need to know who we are. Who are the witnesses to the minor squalls and major tempests facing this representative democracy? An organization known as More in Common was created in 2016 to combat this polarization. Each nation's team has undertaken both short and long-term projects to understand and combat these forces of polarization, which have become a modern kind of tribalism. In 2018, one of the projects in the U.S. yielded a report, The Hidden Tribes of America. It collected the views of more than 8,000 people, statistically representative of the population. They held 30-hour-long interviews, along with 6 separate focus groups. The researchers found that the nation can best be described as a set of tribes, with differing values and codes of behavior, and lately even with differing facts. In their framework, which describes 7 of these tribes, 8% of the population are progressive activists, 11% are traditional liberals, 15% are passive liberals, 26% are the politically disengaged, 15% are moderates, 19% are traditional conservatives, and 6% are devoted conservatives. Most Americans will find this breakdown more in keeping with their own experience of their families, neighbors, and coworkers. While other data from the More in Common researchers finds that fully 77% of us believe that our differences are not so great that we cannot come together.
I still know, deep in my heart, that what we share, as my husband continues to say, is so much bigger than what we don't. Our democracy is so much stronger than our differences.
To quote President Joe Biden, democracy endures only if we, the people, respect the guardrails of the republic. Only if we, the people, accept the results of free and fair elections. Only if we, the people, see politics not as total war, but mediation of our differences. That's one figure that holds out real hope, and it's based on actual face-to-face meetings with a full range of Americans, despite the fact that most of us are part of what More in Common calls the exhausted majority, which includes everyone who is not a devoted conservative or a progressive activist. The events of the last 7 years, dating back to the tumultuous campaign of 2016, have caused many Americans to express concern about the future of our centuries-old democratic republic. According to Monmouth Polling Institute data, just 36% of Americans believe our system of government is sound. Earlier polling by Monmouth showed that figure at 55% as recently as February 2020. To quote Patrick Murray of Monmouth University, "There's more than partisanship at work in declining faith in the institutional framework of American democracy. Yes, electoral outcomes play a role. Yes, the current economic crisis plays a role. But attacks on our fundamental democratic processes and the lack of universal condemnation of those attacks by political leaders from both sides of the aisle have taken a toll." But at least since post-Watergate reforms were put in place in the 1970s, the norms and agreements that establish a democracy to flourish have held up reasonably well in the United States. Nevertheless, the job of a citizen in a democracy is never done. And sometimes events require us to take a closer look at what's happening to our democracy if we are serious about keeping it healthy. Our much revered democracy has never been a spectator sport, yet for too many of us it is becoming just that. According to data from Indiana.gov, the participation rate for the spring 2022 primary in Monroe County fell to an alarming level, just 14%.
For the primaries, we're historically low here. That's been trending worse no matter how you parse the numbers. I'm also vice chair of the Republican Party, used to be chair. We haven't filled a ticket up in probably a decade.
We just came through a primary. We didn't even have 20% of the eligible voters come out and vote in a primary. That's very sad.
This pallid voter participation rate is a sign of the ill health of our democracy, and the very word democracy says as much. Rule of the people. In a healthy democracy, those who are eligible to vote need to show up. And in a healthy democracy, the kind of gerrymandering that goes on in many states, conducted by both parties when they get a chance, has only made matters worse.
I think specifically in Indiana, it's really hard to engage voters. I think when you live in a state as gerrymandered as Indiana, it's really hard to convince people that their vote means something.
I think the way that we have drawn districts, it concentrates people, like-minded people, into particular areas, and it makes it more difficult for the opposing party to even get any traction.
For most of its millennia-old history, Democratic participation was strictly limited along the lines of race, sex, status, or property ownership, sometimes all of the above.
So in our family, when we turned 18, we made a big deal out of going to the polls to vote, because I know that people of color were killed for that. People were murdered and lynched just for signing up folk. I went to the museum where the 4 little girls had died. The church was bombed, 16th Baptist Church was bombed. And I promised myself I would never miss an election. And I don't care how insignificant people would think an election was, because most people don't vote in primaries. I go and vote. I vote for those 4 little girls.
Former Senator Gary Hart asked a relevant question in his new book, The American Republic Can Save American Democracy. He asked, are the people still sovereign if they do not vote? And, if not, how can that be fixed? Former Indiana Congressman Lee Hamilton put his finger on what he sees as the most serious problem facing our democratic republic. Indifference, the lack of civic engagement, if you want to be more specific. Today, it seems that people just have less confidence in the system and in representative democracy as the way to get the best government possible. As the world grows more complex, people get more confused by it, and they tend to want answers, and they turn to authoritarian sources or semi-authoritarian sources to understand what's going on. Over the centuries, the idea of the people as rulers has evolved to offer even greater opportunities for more of the people to participate. The very idea of democracy has always opposed absolute monarchy and any form of authoritarian rulers. While never perfectly achieved, the aim of our representative democracy has always been to create a collection of citizen rulers. These engaged citizens would celebrate their electoral successes, mourn their losses, and work to iron out their differences in the never-ending pursuit of the goal the preamble made explicit more than 230 years ago, to form a more perfect union. But when Americans look at our polarized electorate, even if we accept the more nuanced description of a collection of separate tribes, we have to ask if we can get everyone to at least tolerate those with whom they disagree fundamentally on all sorts of subjects, policies, and cultural issues. Can we put our differences on hold while we seek to solve our common problems?
That it's time for us, once again, to put our country first. It's time for us to put aside some of our differences and figure out areas where we can work together and compromise.
There are a few organizations dedicating to creating situations where that can happen. America in One Room, an offshoot of the Deliberative Democracy Lab, formerly known as the Center for Deliberative Democracy, is housed at Stanford University. In 2019, it brought together more than 500 citizens from all regions of the United States, representing the nation politically, racially, and ethnically for a 4-day moderated interaction overseen by the National Opinion Research Center at the University of Chicago. The participants were given some briefing materials beforehand, which avoided tribal connections as much as possible, and took part in moderated discussions and large group interactions. Afterward, 95% of participants said that they learned a lot about people very different from me, and nearly all reported that they found the experience valuable. The organization continues with similar activities. It is listed in the resource guide for this video. Another organization with an even wider local reach is Braver Angels, which began after the 2016 election and conducts red-blue workshops that bring together Americans to discuss public issues. The goal of the initial effort was to see if Americans could still disagree respectfully, and just maybe find some common ground. Despite skepticism all around, braver angels found that finding common ground was possible. Today, a visit to the website will let you find local forums on a range of topics of public concern all across the country. As of summer 2022, Red Blue workshops that deal with democracy's issues in particular were scheduled in Georgia, Texas, and Tennessee. Today, warning signs are cropping up all over the United States that serious backsliding in our democracy is taking place with regard to widening participation, making electoral processes transparent, and accepting disappointing results. Each of these areas can be a real danger zone for democracy. But with good faith and popular engagement, these inherent dangers can be overcome. When the people rule, their choices will be more widely accepted as their participation expands. And casting a vote is the primary form of accountability for elected officials. When the rules and processes that govern elections are made public and closely monitored for validity, the outcomes of elections are more widely accepted as the will of the people. When our side loses an election, both wide participation and transparency support a general acceptance of the results, win or lose. After the 2000 election, Americans had faith in the people they elected to follow applicable laws and see that no power grabs took place. Those of us who lived through those tense few weeks can recall that no part of that experience was an easy one. It wasn't easy to accept that a minority of the popular vote would once again elect the new president. It wasn't easy to watch efforts to intimidate the workers engaged in examining the ballots during the Florida recount. And it wasn't easy for the losing side to accept even the actions of the Supreme Court that eventually put an end to the uncertainty, if not the grumbling. Today, we need to do everything we can to see that that faith remains fully justified. The election of 2020 was not nearly as close as the election of 2000, but its aftermath has been far more disturbing and is not simply a matter of a single day or even a single year. The public's faith in democracy appears to have been decreasing for some time. In 2018, Freedom House, a widely respected research organization, reported that 55% of Americans viewed their democracy as weak, and 68% believed it was growing weaker. And Freedom House's own highly regarded report, Freedom in the World for 2022, reported that the US, though still regarded as a consolidated democracy, had slipped from a rating of 94 out of 100 in 2010 to 83 out of 100 in 2020. Meanwhile, the Scandinavian countries rank first with perfect scores, while Canada comes in at a score of 98. So the good news is that the United States remains a working democracy, but there's clearly reason for concern about its health. So let's examine that health. When we visit our doctor for a checkup, the first thing they are likely to do when beginning an examination is to take our vital signs. Suppose we look at our democracy in a similar fashion. Your doctor gets some detailed data about your height, weight, blood pressure, and details from your history, such as whether you smoke or not and how much sleep you get. Most of these items will be directly measurable. Some, however, like judging the elasticity of your skin or assessing how well you move or peering into your ears and nose, will depend on the doctor's judgment, backed by years of training and experience. That's the part that's not so easy for democracy. Even items such as rates of voter participation, which can be expressed numerically, depend on assembling a great many pieces of information to yield the final figure, deciding who was eligible, who registered, and how many of those who did so actually voted. And yet, even that supposedly clean figure is strongly influenced by how the precincts and districts were designed, by how many polling places and drop boxes were available per capita, by what voter ID laws were in place, and by how simple the option was to vote by mail. The Brennan Center found that between January 1st and May 4th, 6 state legislatures, Alabama, Arizona, Florida, Georgia, Kentucky, and Oklahoma, have passed 9 election interference laws. They also found that, in total, lawmakers in 27 states have proposed at least 148 election interference bills. So just as we depend on our doctors' training and years of experience to make sense of even the most direct measurements, so we depend on the years of experience of those who have followed the ebb and flow of democracies in the US and around the world. We might call them doctors of democracy. We've consulted a number of individuals and a range of source materials, some we've already quoted, to track the vitals of our democracy and assemble a brief list of what we call the vital signs of our democratic health. First, regular elections that are free and fair. Elections are the key to any form of democracy, and in a healthy democracy, elections are held as regularly scheduled, despite national or world events. In the past, even world wars have not stood in the way of those democratic nations that were not directly under siege or occupation by enemy forces. Keeping elections free and fair means there should be no needless burdens on voting, such as poll taxes, literacy tests, or excessive obstacles to registering to vote or to casting ballots. As recently as the 1950s, Indiana had poll taxes, and not until the ratification of the 24th Amendment in 1964 was the last poll tax removed from federal elections. And 2 years later, poll taxes were removed from all elections by a Supreme Court ruling, Harper versus Virginia Board of Elections.
The possibilities that in future generations, professional politicians will fool with my vote, with the ballot, and destroy the integrity of the ballot. That's a fundamental challenge to democracy. If we don't believe in the outcome of our elections as honest and fair, we're going down the tubes.
Second, civic participation. And what is almost a corollary to the first vital sign, all citizens should be encouraged to take part in elections. As Lee Hamilton said, I think the main source of threat to our democracy is indifference, the lack of civic engagement.
And I think that is the most important necessity we need today. Citizen participation, informed citizens, rational, thoughtful citizens.
This will entail lowering as much as possible the barriers to registration and voting, while ensuring fairness and accuracy. As much as possible means there needs to be a balance between encouraging participation and combating malfeasance. But with participation below 30% in the off-year election of 2014, according to ballotpedia.org, Indiana and Texas vied for last place among the states in percentage of eligible voters who cast ballots. With rates that low, it seems pretty clear that barriers to voting do not need to be raised further. State laws governing voting have been in considerable flux since the 2020 election, but the picture is at best a fuzzy one. Here in Indiana, opportunities for early voting and voting by mail have been expanded, while at the same time the number of drop boxes for mail-in ballots have been reduced, according to the Brennan Center for Justice. One proposal that has growing acceptance is automatic voter registration. As of December 2020, there were 20 states that made voter registration automatic. The Brennan Center for Justice describes the process this way. Eligible citizens who interact with government agencies are registered to vote unless they decline. This policy boosts registration rates, cleans up the rolls, makes voting more convenient, and reduces the potential for voter fraud, all while lowering costs. But there are those who raise questions about the process. In 2013, Hans von Spakovsky criticized the process by suggesting that it could, quote, result in the registration of large numbers of ineligible voters, as well as multiple or duplicate registrations of the same individuals. When combined with the accompanying proposal that states allow any individuals who are not automatically registered to register and vote on Election Day, mandatory voter registration presents a sure formula for registration and voter fraud that could damage the integrity of elections. Much of this argument against automatic registration depends on it being mandatory, but the Brennan Center specifies unless they decline. Third, rights belong to individuals, not to groups. This means that all citizens are seen as equal, without regard to the ascriptive identities they may fall into, that is, without regard to the race, religion, ethnicity, political party, or any other group to which they belong. This requirement cuts both ways and means that governments must be powerful enough to protect individuals from the actions of oppressive groups that can try to coerce members' votes, but constrained enough that the governments do not grow oppressive themselves. By guaranteeing rights to individuals rather than groups, a nation puts a significant obstacle in the way of the tyranny of the majority, and there needs to be a zone of private thought and behavior that enables members of minorities, religious, ethnic, racial, regional, etc., to exercise their personal freedoms. Fourth, rule of law. All citizens must be equal before the law. This is easy enough to say, but to enforce it, the judicial system must be independent of political influence. And making that so requires the separation of powers so that the executive, legislative, and judicial branches are distinct and insulated from unduly influencing one another. Moreover, a variety of checks and balances across the branches is necessary to ensure this crucial separation.
I think democracy also needs a constant attention to the rule of law, not just violation for petty little things, but fundamental values of democracy require that we honor the rule of law. And that includes the laws that apply to voting. Our voting integrity is now in great danger and has been for several years.
A democracy cannot survive if its citizens forsake the rule of law in favor of violence or threats of violence.
Fifth, negative indicators. The overall sense worldwide is that democracies are falling back to levels like those before the fall of the Soviet Union. Varieties of Democracy is an organization that tracks the health of democracies around the world. With headquarters at the University of Gothenburg, VDEM gathers data that can be chilling for those who value freedom and individual rights. They've determined that liberal democracies peaked in 2012 with 42 countries and are now down to the lowest level in over 25 years, 34 nations, home to only 13% of the world's population. Measures of the ill health of a democracy include the spread of misinformation and conspiracy theories, and the polarization of the populace. The growth of this corruption of the public information space is evident in the decline of local newspapers that's taking place across the country. According to a study conducted by Northwestern University, 2023 saw an average of 2.5 newspapers closing every week, compared to 2 per week in 2022. Also during 2023, they found that 43,000 journalists lost their jobs. According to Penny Abernathy, the co-author of the report and a visiting professor at Northwestern's Meadow School of Journalism, what we are trying to do is frame this as a crisis for democracy. Moreover, that decline is as much a cause of the misinformation that infects our nation as it is a symptom. Even in Bloomington, the venerable Herald Times is staggering its way through this new century. Sheila Kennedy, a retired professor of law and public policy in the IUPUI School of Public and Environmental Affairs, calls this decline inevitable, as even in the papers that have managed to stay alive, most news of public importance is replaced by all sports and entertainment all the time.
But I think a lack of true news is making a difference. We've seen a death of newspapers from all around the country.
Serious problem in states like Indiana is we have these like news deserts where our news is being outsourced from other locations, and we don't have people in within our state or within certain cities who are reporting on the news there on the ground.
While these problems are by no means a recent innovation, the digital age has made this disease even more virulent and highly contagious. But because disinformation has long been a problem for democracies, a number of organizations share the goal of countering the bad information with good information. Among such organizations are groups like the League of Women Voters, which, in addition to advocating for voters' rights and registering voters in communities across the nation, also works to counter bad information.
I think that organizations like the League play a huge role in groundwork. There are a lot of things happening in courts and in legislatures, but really it's the groundwork in the communities, spreading information, sharing with other people how issues impact us, that is encouraging people to get involved and is encouraging people to take action. And I think that organizations play a huge role in kind of fueling this fire for democracy.
Many other strategies for combating these maladies are being tried around the world in an effort to combat what are sometimes highly organized campaigns of falsehoods. They are too numerous to detail here, but all seem to engage in some version of these steps, which are based on advice from the University of West Florida University Library's website. First, evaluate the source. Check credentials, sources, dates, and other such verifiable information. 2, Google it. If the information came from social media, check Google and see if similar claims are being made by reputable news sites. and fact-checking organizations. 3. Check reliable news websites. What are the odds that the New York Times, Reuters, the Agence France-Presse, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, the BBC, NPR, and the Associated Press are all peddling the same fake story? Any one of them would love to be the first to blow the whistle on a false story. 4th, try to distinguish opinion from fact. Items from editorial or opinion pages do not have to present both sides, nor do the evening shows on cable news stations, and they usually don't. Ask yourself what the other side might be saying at the same time, and maybe change channels to find out. The dangers to democracy of misinformation are clear to any observer and help account for the sense of unease that many Americans now feel about their future. Defending democracy against these threats without engaging in them is a problem that must be acknowledged if we are to continue our long road toward building a healthy and safe democracy for everyone. What Yascha Mounk refers to in the title of his recent book as the Great Experiment. The experiment has been more difficult than many Americans have recognized for many years. Most successful and healthy democracies are less diverse than the U.S. has long been. But nations are changing as people continue to move around the world, driven by war, famine, climate change, and a desire to improve their lives in new lands. Free and representative democracy remains a great attraction, and America is one of its leading representatives. From its very inception, the founding principles of America have molded it not just into a society, but into an idea. In the words of Yale history professor Timothy Snyder,
the idea that democracy is something that you do yourself or for which you take risks had receded so far out of our imagination that we couldn't really imagine that a country would take risks for democracy. Without the ability to think of democracy as a verb, as something that you do, as something for which you'll take risks, nothing else matters.
This idea on which our democratic republic was founded remains a central feature of America, as Khizr Khan, a Pakistani-American Gold Star parent, expressed in his essay, Persuasion. He said that, after declaring independence, the Americans crafted the Constitution and then the Bill of Rights. Together, these 3 documents are the guiding lights of the nation we live in today. The genius of these documents was to place the power of decision-making in the hands of the people, while protecting the fundamental human rights of the minority. These foundational values and ideals are why the United States has, throughout its history, been a beacon of hope for the world. And in the words of another famous American,
the point is, if we want democracy to flourish, we will have to fight for it. We will have to nurture it. We will have to demonstrate its value again and again in improving the lives of ordinary people. And we will also have to be willing to look squarely at the shortcomings of our own democracies. Not the ideal, but the reality of our own democracies.
now it's time to get active, get engaged, learn about the issues and the candidates, make sure you register and vote yourself, help your neighbors get registered and make it to the polls. If you are especially interested in healing the rifts in American politics and culture, consider getting in touch with Braver Angels or America in One Room and learning how to set up a local event with citizens from your community. It won't be easy, but doing important work never is.
Sometimes a situation gets so toxic and so dangerous, well, you have no choice but to get your hands dirty.
But as Joyce Vance reminded readers of her Civil Discourse podcast, we've known for a long time that it was up to us citizens to do the hard work. We all know the story about Ben Franklin emerging from the Constitutional Convention and telling a woman who asked what type of government they'd created, "A republic, if you can keep it." The 2024 election is the moment where we find out if we can.